Hey, it's Christi. Let's create something simple, easy, lovely, and fun. It's just a little, like a little leafy heart. Because why not? Come on, let's go. So this is where we're going, and this is what we need. Now I've used some of these artist trading cards. They're made by Strathmore, a little bristle board. I like them because they're already cut into this perfect size. I love working on bristle board. It's my paper of choice. But honestly, any little snippet of white cardstock type paper can work. You don't want something that's just like typing paper that's absorbent but in the wrong way, but you could have watercolor paper, cardstock, and of course want something like this. I'm using a micron pen, and this is the PN. They have different numbers in here depending on how big the nibs are or whatever, but it's got kind of like a little rounded point. I love this pen for two reasons. One, it's really easy to use. It just flows on the paper. Great. And it's also archival and basically waterproof, so that I can draw everything, let it dry, and then put my watercolor right on top without smearing or stuff like that, which is important. You don't want to draw some wonderful little thing with a pen, like a felt pen or something, and then it smears all over the place, unless that's what you're going for. But at least you should know that that's what you're getting and not just be surprised. Then watercolors. You can use any kind of watercolors that you want. I learned on Winsor Newton and I love them. This is a fun little set, but you know, I recommend a little higher quality watercolor if you get into this sort of thing. But honestly, start with whatever you've got. All right, a little bit of water, obviously, and a brush, and I use this sort of rounded. They have a name. I can't remember what it is at the moment, but this kind of brush is good because it holds a lot of water, but it gives you a finer point to play with, and about this thickness is perfect. A little bit of white glue or Eileen's glue or whatever. And I just had a little piece. This is actually washi paper, but it could be a piece of tissue paper or wrapping paper or just whatever paper you got around, because I wanted to put just a little pop of color in there. And honestly, part of the reason I did that is I did some little wiggly bits with my pen, and I thought, I don't really like that very much. So I just ripped a piece of paper, and I like this kind of washi paper because it's fibrous, and so it rips very lovely, and turned it into just a pop of color. Now, the thing that makes this such a fun little project is you can tell how well I stayed within the lines. Now, watercolor is a little tricky, and I'm obviously being facetious. Watercolor can be a tricky medium in that there are certain ways that you use watercolor where it responds well or fights you, yeah? And so that's a thing you learn over time with practice, and it's great fun. If you have used watercolor before, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you find out as you go that sometimes you can't blend it the way you thought or whatever. And there's a lot of factors to that. I'm not going into that today because that's not what this is about. This is about fun, easy, simple. Anybody can do it. So I thought, let's just draw what looks like a complicated thing, but is actually super simple. I'm going to show you how. And then just slop some color on there and make it look just free and fun and effortless. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing is, as I mentioned before, this paper. You can get this on Amazon. You can get it at a number of other places directly from the company. A lot of the finer or places that carry finer art supplies will carry it. And like I said, you can use whatever you want, or you can have a bigger piece of paper and cut it down into sizes. One of the things I like about this particular size is it's very manageable. All right, it's a smaller size. We can work a little bit smaller. It doesn't have to be super tricky. We don't have to have a big area to fill up, and we really don't have to worry about too much design. So the first thing you want to do with your pen is we're going to make a heart. All right, and I'm going to put it mostly in the middle of the page, and I'm not going to let the two ends touch. All right, now it can be misshapen. It can be anything you want. Just have this sort of heart shape, you're good to go. And at the end of each, and I could like even extend one a little longer if I wanted to, you're going to put like just this little bubble. So what we're going for here is sort of it's a leaf, obviously, so it's a leaf shape, but I'm not taking the time to make it too pointed, although you certainly can. I'm making it a little bit more rounded. But that is just super easy. And then I'm going to just come by and put little stems all along, and you notice how they're angling down. They're like pointing towards that little bubble at the end. And I'm going to come and fairly spaced apart, so we've got room. And as I get to this upper curve, I'm going to let these little lines start moving so that they're going like the rays of the sun. If you imagine this is the center of the sun, those little lines would follow the way the rays of the sun would. And I'm not going all the way up, but just about there. I'm only going to do this one side first. And now I'm just adding those little leafy bubbles. They can and should move around. They're not all going to be perfectly lined up, although some plants love to line up and be very organized. Many plants are just all over the place. So if you're the type of person that really likes things to be neat, tidy, and organized, great. There are plants that do that. If you're a wild and free, crazy, all over the place kind of person, then that is your plant. And both are 100% acceptable. So you notice that as I'm getting to the top, I'm making each one of these little leafy bubbles more smaller and smaller and smaller as we go up. So now I want to put the little stems of the leaf on the opposite side, and each one is making like a little point. So if you were looking at arrows, all the arrows would be pointing up here. If you're looking at just the lines, they're angling to the bottom. Is that confusing? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this one here, and you see how this one is kind of close to this, so I want to be making sure that I am considering both the angle of the leaf and what else is there. So yours may not do that, mine did. And now I can put those stems in the rest of the place. And this is going to be just a little bit different here because I'm not making it angle quite as much, but you could do whatever you want. But I'm making the stems and now adding the little bubbles. One thing I find, and I don't want to give you too many like rules or things to do, because honestly, this should all be about the joy. It should be about the fun. If you mess up, who cares? Nobody has to see it. These little pieces of paper are pretty cheap. You can practice on super cheap stuff if you want to until you get the hang of things, if you're worried about that. But honestly, just have fun with it. And then if it turns out great, it turns out great. If it doesn't, oh, well, that was practice. Now, when you get up here, you can continue to make more, or you can just make sort of like little bubbles and be enough, all right? And now we're going to do the same thing on the other end. I'm going to make some more lines. Oh, what I was going to tell you about not too much rules is one thing that you do want to worry about is not getting your hand smearing on where you've just been, because until it dries, it can smear around, and I've certainly done that before. So I'm going to always be moving my paper around so that my hands can stay out of the zone of smearage. So just, take that into consideration. And I always like to do, personally, you can do whatever you want, I always like to do one set of leaves first and then do the other side. I think it just gives me a little bit of better visual to work against than trying to do both stems and both leaves at the same time. I don't know. I find it easier. You may have a completely different other thing that works for you. And there's that one. And now I'll come back and do the other side. And leaves can touch, they can wiggle, they can do leafy things. It's all up to you. So like, look at how fun does that look, right? Let me put another one here and here. Okay, so now, perfect. We don't need to do anything else. We're gonna leave a little space for that flowery thing in the middle if we want. But I love doing this little border thing, and here is why. Doesn't this look more finished than this? I mean, I think it does. I think it just kind of gives an overall like ta-da to the thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take coming from the center here, I'm going to either go off in this direction or off in this direction. It doesn't really matter. I don't want to go straight up just because I think that's sort of static. But I'll do what I did here is I'm going to just take this and I'm just going to curve it towards the corner, all right, and then move it around. and I'm just going to curve it, and now I'm purposefully going to be wiggly with this. Do you know why? Number one, it's organic. Things are growing. You want to have those loose and flowy lines. But also, that makes sure that if you mess up by not being exactly perfect, nobody knows because it's all wobbly. And then when you come over here on this end, you can make it join up, you can make it do whatever, but I'm just going to end it with another little leaf. And because of the spacing on this, I might do a couple more leaves. And somewhere in here, depending on the balance, like on this, as you notice, this guy's a little crooked, so I put something over here to sort of visually balance that. This guy got a little bit more in the center, but I'll just go ahead and put a couple more little of the same leaves right here. And I just did them on the inside of the frame because why not? The next thing I want you to do, and this is important, is put your little initial in there or whatever it is you like to do to sign your work, because as an artist, people want to know who made this. It makes it more personal, it makes it more valuable, and I don't mean valuable in the sense of money, although that could be the case, especially if you're like a Picasso or whatever, that's important. But it has the value added because you are saying, I am proud of this, I am putting a very discreet little fun mark to show that this is something that I did and that other people will value the me of it, not just the decoration of it, but the me as an artist of it. And I like that. All right, now here's an important part. We have to let this dry, because if I was to smear my finger on it right now, some parts of this would smear, which would be sad. It's not the end of the world. There's things you can do about that. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video, but I want to make sure it's dry completely before I do this watercolor part. So at this stage, what you can do is you can find your little piece of color. And like I said, I had this little piece of red washi paper, which I chose to use because it rips well. And I'm going to just rip it. Now, you could cut this out if you want. You could have all kinds. I have no idea what kinds of ideas you're going to come up with. But I'm going to just take this little bit, and I've got some pliers here just so I can pick it up and you can see it, and see how was that going to look in that area. I think that's going to look great. So I'm going to hold on to that. We're not going to put that on until we've done the painting. All right, let's let that dry. I'd say 5 minutes. If you want, you could use a little bit of a heat gun or a blow dryer just gently over to kind of set everything. But let's let that get nice and dry for about 5 minutes at least. Okay, my watercolors. I've had this watercolor set for years, probably decades actually. And I like these little small cases. I tend to go with something a little bit more quality. I don't mind spending a little bit on watercolors, but then I do a lot of watercolors. So that's up to you. Everything can work. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. So whatever you find. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, and I am going to, and by the way, some of the things that I've used, if you go to, I'll have a link in the description to my Amazon influencer page where I put some of the sources for the things that I use. And you can find some of these items there if you don't have a ready source for these. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make myself a little wash. And how I do that is I take a little bit of water, I bring in some colors until I get a color that I'm happy with. And, you know, you might have to practice with this until you feel comfortable with the color mixing and how wet does it need to be and all that. That just comes with practice. And I'm loading up my brush with a nice wet mess, because the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of go around here and just flirp. All right, you see how wiggly that is? And I'm doing the outside edges first because they're less important. Now, do you see how that's doing that? That's probably because I was touching with my hands and there's a little bit of skin oil on there. That happens sometimes. Don't even worry about it. If it bothers you, then you can go back over the area again and it works out fine. So what I'm doing is I'm just letting the watercolor be the watercolor, and I am just smearing it in the line area and not worrying too much if it covers well or just a little, because that's part of the joy of watercolor. It has thick spots and thin spots, and spots that sort of, as you can tell with this one, then when they dry, you have little water edges. That is the beauty of it. And I think if you're doing something with watercolor, we embrace that part of it because it is what makes it exciting. So now I'm going to be very careful how I hold this, but hold on to it so it won't go somewhere. And I'm just going to take my brush and just go push, so it gets wide, and then bring it around like that. Now you notice how much of a clump there is there? If you don't like that, you can spread that back out, or you can even dry off your brush a little bit and pick some of that up and get rid of some of that. So if I dried my brush all the way, but you want to do that while your watercolor is wet. Otherwise, it will just be gunky and not what you want. So I'm going to just leave it at that. So you can see it's just a nice, lovely little wash, and you don't even have to clean your brush off because, you know, watercolor dries and then gets reanimated as soon as it's wet again. So that's fine. But now I can look this over. It's not good to go back and touch watercolor up and try to smooth things. You can do that while it's wet. But once it starts to dry, it tends to leave weird marks and, you know, it gets frustrating. So just embrace the kind of lovely chaos of it in that it does its own thing. That's part of the fun of this. That's part of what makes this work, because it's not coloring in the lines. It is a wash. So you want it to be just a little weird. All right, so now let's place our little bit of paper, flowery color, whatever it is. I'm going to use tweezers. You don't have to, but it's just a little easier here to show you. And I'm going to put just a touch of this white glue on here. And I want to make sure that it goes all the way to those furry little edges, but there's not too much. And I'm just going to stick it in place, bloop, and push it down. All right. Now, you don't have to, but I put little flowery petal things on there just because I could. And I think that's kind of fun. So all I'm going to do now is just do little lines sticking out. And the interesting thing about this is it's a very absorbent paper. So I found that as I put the lines on, they just kept getting reabsorbed into the paper, which didn't bother me at all because it kind of made for an interesting look. So after I put stuff on there, I had to keep on adding a little bit more until it started to dry. And I don't know, I liked how that turned out. And I think it is really great as it dries because you've got those parts that are like more concentrated color and then parts that are not, which I just think adds to the fun. All right, let's let that be. So now what have we got? We have got this lovely little, and they're different every time, as you can see, just this lovely little fresh and floral and lovely, and did I say lovely because it's lovely, little leafy heart. And you can put this in a little frame if you want to. You could punch a hole in it and make it a tag on a gift to somebody that means a lot to you. Or you can just look at it for a while until you decide if you want to do something more with it. I'm always of the opinion is nothing is done until it's done. And it can be ages before you see something and decide to do whatever is next with it. But I loved it. I thought it was just such a fun little thing to do. So easy, so free. And I mean, who wouldn't want to get a little one of these from you? So I hope you liked that. Isn't that fun? Have a blast just making as many of those as you want. Experiment. See what happens. Happy creating.